Good evening, all. Let us bring the congregation to order. How are we all doing tonight? I'm feeling absolutely jubilant myself. This is the end of our Gloucester Writers Center summer series. We have had a series of readings over the course of the summer, including many poets, fiction writers, memoirists, all sorts. It's one of the things we do, one of the many things we do at the Gloucester Writers Center. And you can see that I'm attired in my workwear from my other life, where I'm a union agitator. And so in that role and in that spirit, I'm here to let you know what we need from the collective. You ready for this? We are in the middle of our summer fundraiser, Midsummer Night's Dream fundraising appeal. We are trying to reach the goal of $20,000. We have made 1/4 of that amount at this point, and are intending to close donations in the next 2 weeks. So please, if you feel so moved after these readers tonight, I'm sure that you will, please feel free to dig deep and give. We have multiple avenues. You can visit the Gloucester Writers Center website. You can put a couple of dollars in that vase in the back. You can put a check in an envelope, which we have kindly provided for you this evening. I'm a good union guy, yeah? Yeah. What else is there to say? Oh, and at the end of this summer, we are very excited to have partnered with a fan and advocate of the Gloucester Writers Center, our good friend Mike Perot, who lives in Magnolia. Some of you might know him. He's a great poet in his own right, and he has volunteered to open his house to us to have kind of a celebratory party salon at the end of this whole thing, tickets for which can also be purchased on our website. Good? Now to tonight's program. Enough with the business. Yeah. We have 2 readers for you tonight, Erica Funkhouser and J.D. Debris, both of whom have brought books for purchase, and those will be available at the end of the program toward the back at the tables. Erica's new book of poetry, Post and Rail, and JD's The Scorpion's Question Mark. Is that right? Did I get that title? Yeah. What an evening. So, let's see. Tonight, Erica will be reading first, followed by JD. This is this exciting thing that happens when you're working with artists and poets. I said, oh good, I will get the poet Erica Funkhouser and the poet J.D. Debris. I have gotten the essay writer Erica Funkhouser and the musician J.D. Debris. So hopefully my little intro for Erica's work will be apropos for her prose writing as well. I think that it is. Anyway, so Erica Funkhouser is a poet, playwright, and teacher whose work has been widely published. 2 book-length poems, Sure Shot and Post and Rail, are great indicators of her exacting ear and sustained attention to the craft of writing. Sure Shot, a poem about Annie Oakley, was adapted for the stage, while other work has been set to music. These collaborations are plausible because writing as rich as Funkhouser's is its own sort of topsoil, able to allow for fruitful and inventive envisioning and reinvention. Her poems are exacting and deeply felt. The tension between the sentence and the line, and I'm going to try to make this into a statement about her sentences generally, although I'm thinking it about a poem. The tension between the sentence and the line is put in service of recreating the jarring rhythms of experience, as in this first sentence from the poem Grief. I try to impose the static beauty of what remains, like the one utensil in an auction drawer, onto the cluttered truth of what is gone, not even gone, but going. Tonight, we will hear Funkhouser's sentence crafting put to work in an essay that shares with her poetry her eye for the accretive nature of our world and the materials which accent and signify our lives. Please join me in welcoming Erica Funkhouser.
you. Thank you, Eric. I've never been called topsoil before. I like that. I like that a lot. Thank you. And thank you to Henry, and thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. I'm reading from an essay called Time and Materials, which is about a neighbor and a friend of mine who died in 2019, who was such a representative Cape Ann figure that I thought this was the audience I wanted to share this work with. I'm also grateful to the Harvard Review, which published this, and to so many small magazines which allow writers like myself to just experiment a little bit. The essay's broken into a couple different parts. Time and materials. Emergency scene. When I hear the sirens, I call B's shop to see if everything's okay. His helper, Dave, answers the phone. B has gone away, he says. I walk right over. In 40 years, I've never heard Dave say a single word. He's standing a few feet from the ambulance, shoulders slumped inside his beige windbreaker, head hung low, strands of gray hair dangling over his collar. Like a conifer whose branches tend downward, Dave's habit of growth has a way of encircling him and keeping others out. He had, in fact, been confined to his parents' house for years before B rebuilt an old Raleigh bicycle for him, taught him how to ride it, and gave him a job. Every morning for decades, Dave has turned into B's driveway at 11. At 4, he heads home again, a routine so firmly established that it will continue even after B's death. Behind the policeman, there's a different kind of emergency scene, archaeology on a menacing boil. Heaps of raw ingredients ranging in size from a padlock to a truck chassis seem to have been expelled violently from chasms in the earth. The disorder's a hybrid of the organic and the manufactured. Flowering vines thrive inside a rusted brake cylinder. The roots of a beech sapling range over rubber hoses in which mice are assembling their nests. Amidst the chaos, the granite and the lumber remain remarkably curated, stacked in orderly piles, just as they would be in a lumber yard or stone yard, except that nothing is new. Everything is reclaimed. It was all salvaged from other sites and brought here by B to await the next stage in its life cycle. Slabs of granite, some a foot thick and 12 feet long, are stacked according to length. Each stack is distinct. One pile ends in a rusty waterfall of corrugated sheet metal. Another culminates in a collision of wood stove parts, bellies, feet, doors, stovepipes. Elsewhere lie mounds of field stones. Then there are the cobblestones. Hundreds of them have been stacked in long, thick rows. Wedged between two trees is a collection of recently cut cobbles whose sharp edges and specks of mica catch the intermittent sunlight. At the other end of the yard lie older cobbles with their beautifully rounded corners and signs of wear, a crack, a chip, a smear. They're a darker gray. They contain more hornblende. Some are tinged gold with lichen. Nearby, sheds have been built to house boards of every length and width. One is a narrow peak-roofed 3-story building, a giant's guardhouse. Its basement is filled with ladders, its attic with wooden shingles. The front of the building is open, with 2 halves of a green tarp pulled back to either side, like theater curtains. Next to the shed, fence pickets stand upright in the centers of rimless tires. Behind the tires, the giant bucket from a front-end loader holds wooden pallets. Beyond that, sheets of plywood straddle 2 doorless refrigerators. The eye keeps going to a bulbous forest of water tanks, to a hillock of clay sewer pipes, to a stack of metal siphons the size of highway cones, faded to the delicate pink of dogwood blossoms. Quickly, before the whole thing collapses, the eye moves on. When I turn around to go home, I think of the things I've left out. B's truck, for one. It's parked on a slope facing the road. He kept it there in case he needed to roll start it. He built the truck himself from a plan for one of Ford's first Model T trucks. The headlamps are brass. The cab is hunter green. It has no windows, no turn signals, no seat belts. At its fastest, it could reach 40. I can still see my young daughter scrambling up into the truck for a drive to the junkyard, a drive that offered more adventure than any she could embark on while strapped into the plastic car seat in her parents' station wagon. Near the truck stands an old yellow school bus. Its seats have been removed to make room for sewing machines and washing machines. Across the aisle, cooking utensils have been arranged in an inscrutable hierarchy, from lobster steamers to cheese graters to graduated measuring spoons. The small opening at the back of the bus where its emergency lights used to flash now displays an array of miniature fans. The effort of writing these paragraphs makes me vaguely aware of what it must have been like to be B. Everything in his yard once had a purpose and might well have had one again had he lived on. He had plans for a radio, a windmill, a sawmill, a hydraulic hoist, an airplane, and an underground house. How easily the mind of a fabricator roves from, say, a few rusty stove parts to the prospect of a well-functioning wood stove and the room it will keep warm. I hoard phrases and sentences for the same reason. I'm fond of them. I can't part with them, even if I haven't yet found the right use for them. In this sense, I understand B all too well. A dream arises as easily from a shard as it does from a finished product. The machine shop. The first responders found B on the floor of his machine shop next to his workbench. He died suddenly at the age of 76, probably of a stroke or a heart attack. He might have fallen and hit his head. The tools he'd need for the first job of the day were already laid out on the bench. For over 40 years, B lived here illegally, which was on a property which was taxed as a workshop, but which was in fact many workshops and his home. In a rare act of civic indulgence, perhaps because he had once served as a selectman and helped to write the town bylaws, he was allowed to live at his shop, despite the fact that he had no running water, no plumbing, no septic. From the entryway, a door leads to the heart of the machine shop, a 34-foot-long shed laid on a concrete slab. Up to a height of 5 feet, the walls are cinder block. Above that, a steeply pitched roof rises to 14 feet. Even with its overhead fluorescents burning, the shop is dark until the lights specific to each machine are turned on. These are the machines B used to fabricate headlamps for antique cars, his mail order business, custom fireplace inserts, halyard stays. He could make anything. When my then husband and I were working on our house in the 70s, B often stopped by to check on our progress. One day, and also to get dinner. One day when we'd built a skylight but couldn't figure out how to raise and lower it, we asked him if he had any ideas. He took a long look and said, "The steering mechanism of an old Studebaker will give you the angle you need." Soon we were on our way to the junkyard, where B circled a sky-high pile of scrap metal for a few minutes before he stopped and pointed. There's one. 40 years later, the skylight still opens and closes without a hitch. A few steps from the entrance to the machine shop stands a cast iron Reed Prentice 14-inch metal lathe that weighs about 5,000 pounds. It's painted a soft custard yellow, a color that comes as an even greater surprise if you know that B got the lathe from a retired World War II submarine. Flecks and curls of brass, steel, and copper sparkle in the sunlight slanting through the open door. On days when he had done a lot of work in brass, the floor and all the surfaces in the shop would shimmer with golden filings, the machinist's magical debris, known by its Anglo-Saxon name, swarf. Behind the lathe, on the wall, hang tongs, wedges, mallets, and metalworking hammers, arranged first according to size of handle, then according to size and shape of head or claw. Perpendicular to the lathe is a fire engine red Pesto foot-operated 36-inch sheet metal shear. Kitty-corner to that stands a Bridgeport vertical milling machine. It's 6 feet tall and painted battleship gray with the complex armature of a giant squid. On every wall, there are tightly packed shelves, drill bits in soup cans, drill bits in bread tins, drill bits in ice cube trays, also files, rasps, screwdrivers, scissors, and crimpers. The center of the machine shop is occupied by a large work table. If you were to look straight up from that table, you'd see what looks like the bottom of another table, except that all 4 sides have been built up in the fashion of a nesting box for hens. The whole thing is suspended from the ceiling by 4 chains. This is B's bed. I wonder if the first responders noticed it. Did they wonder why a ladder was braced against his work table? Did they realize that B died in his bedroom as well as in his machine shop? The reason for the bed. B built the bed about 40 years ago. In those days, it hung from 4 shock absorbers he'd taken off of a tractor trailer. That's what he had on hand, and he was in a hurry. A young woman from rural Minnesota was on her way east. B had placed an ad for a wife in one of the alternative magazines popular in the 1970s. You don't make these things up. Probably Mother Earth News, and the ad was answered more quickly than he'd expected. I can only imagine what he wrote. I suspect it had the ring of a 19th century personal ad. Hard-working, decent fellow with 3 acres and all his teeth, seeking bride to share lifetime of adventure. Whatever he wrote, she came. There must have been at least one phone call because B once mentioned that his wife wasn't as resourceful as he'd been hoping. He told her that when her train arrived in Boston from St. Paul, a journey of about 30 hours, all she had to do was walk from South Station to North Station, a serpentine city mile, and catch the commuter rail north. But she got lost on the way and missed her train. The fact that she'd never been outside of Minnesota before, never been in a big city, and would be carrying a suitcase packed for the rest of her life eluded him. His wife was gone by the time I got to know B. I don't know her name. I never heard him say it. But I do know the name of her daughter. The young woman from Minnesota had arrived pregnant. More than seeking a husband, it turned out she was escaping shame. Undeterred by the pregnancy, B and his bride married, and he became the baby's proud father. The marriage lasted long enough for him to make a wooden cradle and a little sled with metal runners for pulling the baby in the snow. But according to B, his wife was spoiled. She tired of having to drive to her mother-in-law's house for a shower. She'd never lived in a home without a television. She was scared of the outhouse. By the time the little girl was 3, mother and daughter had returned to Minnesota. On his own once again, B built himself, this section is called the Octagon. B built himself an octagon. It stands on top of a hill and is reached by 26 steep wooden steps open to the weather. Inside sits a wooden roll-top desk whose rolling top disappeared long ago. This is where, for years, B drew the plans for his plans. 2 gooseneck lamps point to a pad of graph paper. Glass mugs are filled with sharpened pencils. The filing cabinets contain folders labeled windmills, motorcycles, stone bridges, subterranean houses. Later in life, B became preoccupied with writing letters to the editor of the local paper, and his desk ceased to be covered with diagrams of airplane wings or solar panels. As he wrote to the newspaper about the minutiae of town politics, particularly about the ignorance and stupidity of nearly every elected official, I think he imagined he was Seneca addressing the elders of Rome. Rhetoric mattered to him. He borrowed one of his favorite terms from Seneca, pumpkinification. Seneca used it in the title of a skit lampooning the deification of the Emperor Claudius, who'd exiled Seneca to Corsica for 8 whole years for the crime of adultery. B enjoyed every opportunity he could find to call a vainglorious politician pumpkinified. It hardly mattered that he was almost always right. His manner of expressing himself was so pugnacious that even his supporters often voted against him. B had a big square head with lots of forehead and not much hair. His bright, warm eyes glittered with expectation, and he held his slightly canted mouth open, prepared always to speak. He looked right at you when he spoke, fixing you in place. He didn't need you to say anything. In fact, if you attempted to hold up your end of the conversation, he'd intercept with a tsunami of a sentence that might contain the history of timing mechanisms in stoplights, along with a biography of the traffic engineer Henry Barnes, who developed the coordinated traffic signal timings, the so-called green wave that allows us, when we're lucky, to drive through a succession of green lights in the city. At B's burial, after the service was over, men who'd known and admired him all his life lingered to share their various techniques for escaping from him. "I never turned my truck off," said one. "I'd tell him I had a dentist appointment," offered another. "He didn't seem to notice I went to the dentist 10, 12 times a year." A third mourner laughed and said, "I just told him I got only an hour for lunch, and the hour was up." Things B had no interest in. Animals, wild or domesticated, plants, wild or cultivated, cigarettes, alcohol, restaurants, even coffee shops, lottery tickets, wristwatches, television, team sports, fishing, hunting, boating in boats without motors, any sport that required holding a stick in your hand, organized religion, hairdressers, he cut his own, bathing trunks, he swam nude in a pond he could walk to. Pandemonium. In the weeks after B's death, I crossed the street to his yard to try to get a clearer picture of him. A shepherd of the discarded, he was a man of many parts, not roles, but components. Each time I try to better understand him, I find myself getting stuck at the portal where I'm confronted with all his stuff. It's as if the sight and smell of lubricant, rust, Metal filings, stacked stone, and wood have canceled out my ability to recognize any priorities or draw any conclusions. I'm stopped dead in my tracks by the rafters above me, where hundreds of wooden tool handles are assembled short to long, or by the hand planes splayed across a workbench like a deck of cards, or by the wall of adjustable pipe wrenches, all facing in the same direction, their serrated mouths wide open as if to address the back of their neighbor's head. As I stand in one of B's shops, my own inclination to possess fewer things in order to have less to keep track of and therefore to get more done begins to look like a failure of imagination. B's father was a plumber. Did his father possess the same patient determination to explain a task by insisting you do it yourself rather than by demonstrating? Once, when a character in a story I was writing needed to remove bark from timber with an adze, I asked B if he'd show me how the tool was used. He took a carpenter's adze off the wall. Its handle was 3 feet long and heavy. The blade looked like it had been plucked from a stegosaurus's back. B steadied a piece of firewood between my feet and handed me the adze. There are 2 separate motions, he said. First, you swing down into the wood. Then, once the blade has landed in the wood, not in your foot, you tug upward. The accident, not mine. In one shed, under a heavy green tarp, is a red Harley-Davidson from the 1960s. It's a beautiful little motorcycle. In 1964, when B was a freshman in college, he was struck by a bread truck while riding this bike. He broke bones badly in both his lower leg and his thigh. The injuries set him back, and he never returned to school. Because it was 1964, he was worried about the draft. He didn't want to be drafted into the Army. I could never kill someone, he said. So he took the recruitment exam for the Navy. The Navy called him right up. He'd gotten the highest score they'd ever seen. Perfect. They wanted to train him to be a spy, but he said no to that. So they put him on a destroyer in the Pacific. He spent 2 years in Japan during the Vietnam War repairing aircraft. When he told his stories, there was no mention of napalm or helicopters. Instead, he described the pleasure of fabricating replacement parts for the Navy's elegantly engineered F-4 Phantom IIs. In 1932, new section, sorry, no obsolescence allowed, obsolescence. In 1932, in a paper entitled Ending the Depression Through Planned Obsolescence, a real estate dealer named Bernard London wrote, I propose that when a person continues to possess and use old clothing, automobiles, and buildings after they have passed their obsolescence date, as determined at the time they were created, he should be taxed for such continued use of what is legally dead. The inventor of the term planned obsolescence goes on to say that people in a frightened and hysterical mood are using everything they own longer than was their custom before the Depression. London's solution was to suggest that the government assign a use-by date to all manufactured products, after which they'd be destroyed. He wrote triumphantly, new products would constantly be pouring forth to take the place of the obsolete, and the wheels of industry would be kept going and employment regularized and assured for the masses. One way of looking at B's yard is to see it as an argument against obsolescence, either planned or accidental. While London's argument centers on keeping people working no matter what, B's yard represents the conviction that for the person whose skill and imagination are profound enough, a use may be found for every object. Some days, I walk over to B's yard with friends who are curious to see what's there and who might be interested in buying a machine or two. One has been collecting equipment for a sawmill for 40 years and still hasn't built it. Looking at all this shit, I got to admit I never will, he says. A sculptor loves the anvils, but tells me that if he brings them home, his wife will say, "All these tools and still you never get anything done." A third visitor admires the granite and regrets that she never helped her now deceased father build the stone hut he'd always longed for. Recently, I walked through the yard with someone whose own yard would come in second if the town held a keeper of spare parts competition. He was quiet as we walked around. Afterwards, he sighed, "That was the most profound experience of my life." "How's that possible?" I asked. "You're one of the few people around here who knows what to do with all this stuff." Without a touch of irony, he replied, "It's not the stuff, it's the time. Everywhere I look, I see time." Thank you.
Incredible. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Our next reader is J.D. Debris. He's a creative force who has worked in music, language, and the boxing ring. He has published a chapbook called Sparring and his prize-winning debut, The Scorpion's Question Mark. His attunement to the places where the body and rhythm intersect or intertwine or mesh is what makes his poetry, like music, eminently listenable. And in fact, we'll hear it as music this evening. The voice is contemporary, in touch with the demos. This comes through in sincere work that doesn't fake a voice or revel in research vernaculars. It comes from what the Greek thinker Zizimos Lerenzatos called poetry, quote, baptized in the well of a human life. Of an after-hours event at a boxing ring and the surprising song of a heavyweight fighter, Debris writes, "Hercules sat beside me saying, 'Bro, can you play a corrido beat?' I started to strum a stock waltz meter, and Hercules, in a bass bel canto that could rumble the cheap seats of an opera hall, began a Spanish ballad about a lost bantamweight named Amen, who had disappeared, the lyrics went, to Mexico last spring. The life of a place, the always surprising variety of human experience in his work, makes much of it feel like Horace's celebratory odes of daily life. It is classical and musical and rooted in the now, like the greatest poetry always is. Please join me in welcoming J.D. Debris.
Eric, that was my one poem. Now I got no material. I want to say thank you so much to Henry, Eric, and especially Erica Funkhouser for inviting me here. It's funny because he was saying, Eric was saying such laudatory things, and you're looking at like this idiot behind him, and it's like, is that guy he's talking about, really? I saw him trying to steal my hubcaps the other day. I would like to dedicate this reading to the guy who invented the guitar tool. I would like to dedicate this reading to my grandfather, Augustine, who would be 101 years old today. And I'd like to dedicate it to the OG, Arthur Flowers, keeping the tradition of the griots alive, the West African storyteller poets. This poem is called Aparecida early spring. I probably see a statue of the Virgin who appeared to 3 fishermen in the middle of a storm off the coast of Brazil and brought them to shore. Early spring, early spring, yeah, yeah. A long exhale at the end of a hyperventilating season. All winter, nothing touched my neck except the clenched manic teeth of the electric razor, the beach wind salt. Marvin Hagler, my home state's fiercest fighter. A man so mean, they say hair, fear his sweat-gleamed skull is gone. Rest in power. I've mimicked his ritual mornings, breathless, sprinting the hill. A sea and continent apart, your curls are on my mind. By the logic and legend of that bald, fallen boxer, your curls mean mercy, are wild and fertile as these blossoms blindsiding New England spring. Vines around the cello's neck, its body split, a beehive inside. I dreamt we kissed so slow, it was like breathing for the first time. Early spring, early spring, yeah. Early spring, yeah, yeah. Early spring, yeah, yeah. Appreciate y'all. So I'm reciting, I guess, like in the lyric tradition or the griot tradition, you know, to an instrument. It's kind of a new thing for me. I saw Arthur Flowers reading Lisbon. He blew my brain to bits doing this with the Mbira. So thanks for letting me try out something. I'd like to try the poem that Eric mentioned. It's called The Voice of Hercules. I'd like to transport us to a boxing gym. And in the spirit of the boxing gym, I'd like you to turn to the person sitting next to you. Go ahead. Look them in the eyes and punch them in the face. All right, some of y'all keep it gangster. Okay. I think that's the first time anyone ever spoke those words in Rocky Neck, but. I don't know. I don't really spend much time here. Maybe I'm wrong. It's called The Voice of Hercules, and the moral of the story is sometimes us knuckleheads got something to say too. I'm remembering that heavyweight we call Hercules. A mellow steroid fiend who never sparred, just raised barbells till he was swollen as that solemn British killer from Ninja 2, Shadow of a Tear. He'd flex, hit vacuum poses in ringside mirrors, taking photo after photo, and lounge in the locker room, nothing but a sideways socks hat on. Hercules, put some clothes on, you damn fool. But every word he spoke was praise. So sick, bro. Softly, near inaudible. One night, the gym screened a pay-per-view, De La Hoya or Money May. All us gym rats came back in jewelry, jeans, and the reek of cologne instead of sweat, to cozy up between dormant heavy bags and watch the fights projected on industrial concrete. I brought my old acoustic, this one right here, for between fight amusement, soundtracking our cacophony. Hercules sat beside me saying, "Bro, can you play a corrido beat?" I started to strum a stock waltz meter, something like this. And Hercules, in a bass bell conto that could rumble the cheap seats of an opera hall, began a Spanish ballad about a lost bantamweight named Amen, who disappeared, the lyrics went, to Mexico last spring, whom no one had heard from since. The gym went quiet, one verse in. Pay-per-view muted, everyone listening to this supposed bonehead channel beauty, to his ballad, its fragility. Fly, little dove, fly, he'd sigh at verse's end. Tell you the truth, I'm amazed nobody laughed at him. Insults back then on lingua franca and on form of praise. You know how it is. You're not trying to talk shit. You just love somebody, and that's the only way you got to express it. Nobody laughed at him. In that moment so holy, so ridiculous, when his lips formed O's on long, pure tones and every chord perfectly somehow harmonized. I can't tell you which prize fighter won that bout, or if we gorged on pizza and beer, blowing off our weight-making regimens. I can't tell you if it rained. I can't pretend to know if sparks flew inside all those ears, bent in unison toward the Amen Hercules incanted. As for him, his trainer, a hard-ass Marine, got sick of his preening and told him, go find another gym where he could kiss his biceps in the mirror and drink his creatine and beast his endless deadlift reps. I wonder, how many songs has he sung since in the shower of some distant gym where he still takes his sweet-ass time soaping every rope-like vein? What I know, I'll tell. Around the campfire of the muted fights that night, he was our horn of Gabriel, our nightingale mid-flight. Sing it again, Hercules. Aye. One of the centerpieces of this book, The Scorpion's Question Mark, out now from Autumn House Press, available at that table behind you. You gotta show that video to my publisher, they're gonna love that. Selling the products. One of the centerpieces of the book is a long poem dedicated to Chalino Sanchez. He was a singer-songwriter from Mexico, based in California. He didn't live long. He made a big impact when he was alive. He's the father of the genre called narco corridos, or like drug smuggler ballads. Goes back to an old ballad tradition, and you'll still hear this stuff today in 2023. I'd like to take us back to the early 80s. Chalino Sanchez is 15 years old. This poem was written in the city of New York in 2020. Chalino Sanchez feliz, Chalino Sanchez feliz, Chalino Shalino Sanchez Felix, you should be living this hour. When our borderlines barbed wire crawls, binding across a throat. When the shadows fall in spirals and tighten. The corrido begins like this. Declare you're about to sing one, voy a cantar. Voy a cantar un corrido. Señores, esto pasó. Murió un hombre de valor. Un cobarde lo mató. First verse, Glock against the smuggler's jaw. Ford conquistador speeding away in the second. Third and final, and silver trumpets sway. You hear tall pines crying on their ridge. But before all that, the corrido begins in commerce. Barter a crime lord's tribute song for a pistol or a crucifix. Lionize a henchman for a ram's horn stuffed with 20s. And long before all those beginnings, this, and I want to put a trigger warning right here. These poems are about doing something you never thought you could do, when provoked by something more terrible than you could imagine. Before all those beginnings, this. You kill your sister's rapist at an all-night party. You cross a border. You're 15, invincible, and cursed. Chalino Sanchez Felix. Chalino Sanchez Felix. Chalino Sanchez Felix. Chalino Sanchez Felix. Crossing that border, Chalino got into the business of smuggling across the border. Ended up in La Mesa prison in Tijuana. Ended up in there with an Irish-American nun who lived voluntarily in the prison. This song is for that fantastic woman called In La Mesa Prison, Walking with the Nun. For all the sisters doing the good work, religious or otherwise. Oh, ay, mama de la prisión. Oh, mama de la prisión. Mama de la prisión. Don't mistake this for no confession. I'm not sorry for the rapist I shot in Culiacan. Not after the shell shock and shredded nerves he left my sister to nurse. Mama de la prisión, mama de la prisión. Waiting for your plate of mystery meat among us convicts. Barely 5 feet in your black habit and dangling cross. I have to ask, if California wouldn't keep me, why the hell would heaven? I was a coyote once, a crook, a pimp. I've written 0 hymns and no confessions. Only drug sagas on commission for every goon who wants his royal portrait, his little spaghetti western tale. Mama de la prisión, mama de la prisión. Please set me down in your convent cell. By Virgin Mary candle glow. With the skull you adorned in rosaries and silks, our only witness, mama. Let me tell you this. Oh, Maria, mama de la prisión. Oh, mama de la prisión. Oh, mama de la prisión. Oh, mama de la prisión. takes back from the vulture the plucked out eyes of the narco and points them toward the center of the murder battle. He must know how to waltz the mine shafts beneath Sonora, how to warm his thorn-cut hands with dove's breath and a thin blanket of stars above the vineyard. He must give back to the saguaro its honey, to the shutter canteen and its trumpets. Cleaning his pistol, he must hum softly. He who takes back from the vulture plucked out eyes of the narco, points into the center of the murder valley. Must know he who takes back from the vulture the plucked out eyes of the narco. He points into the center of the murder valley. Must know. He must know. He must know. He must know. I'm skipping around in this sequence a little bit. It's like kind of a pocket epic, but yeah. So now we're out of prison. We're hustling, getting by in LA, and he started writing his first song in prison. That is factual, and it was a tribute to his brother Armando, who was murdered in a deal going bad. And this is a story about the writing of that song. Eric, just let me know when we're out of time. I'm not trying to keep people past their bedtimes. Beverly Grove, oh, 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 oh. Beverly Grove, oh, 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 oh. I wanted cafe con leche, a little piece, when I stopped into that coffee shop on 3rd, with nothing but a notepad in my western shirt and a corrido I half finished months back in La Mesa. What was I doing in that Gabacho neighborhood? Yeah. Beverly Grove, oh, 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 oh. That's for me to know and the law to guess. Fine, fine. I was just at Bloomingdale's. Nothing badass. Bought the wife a ruby crucifix, bright as blood. Blonde barista rapid fired some English, mirrored my smile. I ordered, I thought, coffee. Got some iced swills, sweet as Fanta, weak as tea. Just like Dunkin' Donuts, whoa, 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 whoa. That's how you get booed off the stage in New England, yeah. Y'all a nice audience, thank you. I took a corner seat and started scribbling notes on Armando's murder. 7 bullets, messenger dove singing bad news over Santa Lona. His sons, my nephews, now fatherless and grown. When the boss stormed out from ensconcement to knock knuckles on my tabletop, red jowled. Maybe he didn't like the way I leaned back in snakeskin, cowboy boots crossed on a chair, shirt unbuttoned, with the tilt of my Tejana brim, how its shadow fell. In that half-finished corrido, Armando, lion-hearted, even through his execution at the Santa Rita Hotel, would have flipped the table, made this gringo piss himself. Me? Parolee from La Mesa, trying not to be deported. I bit my tongue until the song beneath it bled. I wrapped my song in fabric the boss would never pull off, in a language he'd never comprehend, and left, raising a middle finger instead of my dad. Yeah. Beverly Grove, oh, 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 oh. Beverly Grove, oh, 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 oh. Beverly Grove, oh, oh, oh. I think I'll just share one more if that works. Yeah, just one more from the Chalino sequence, and then I'll let you all go. Thanks for being here. I have books for sale. Take cash or Venmo. I have books for sale at that table. I can take cash or Venmo. One more time for the people in the back. I'm not that much of a shill. I'd like to thank my mother and father for coming out tonight. Hey, you found them? This is called One for Adan, and on the subject of parents and children. Adan Sanchez was Chalino's young son, who was just a young boy when Chalino was murdered by a cartel. Adan went on to have a singer-songwriter career of his own, even more short-lived than his father. Tragically died at 20, and his funeral was like a major event in LA. Just teenagers openly weeping in the streets. So, yeah, I'm just sending you off on probably the most tragic note possible. Sorry, man. Like, there's blood everywhere, and everyone's crying, and like, have a good night. This is called One for Adan. What ridiculous luck to even be born. What ridiculous luck living long enough to sing how your father was murdered by false policemen. What ridiculous luck to make it through the chorus. Next note, next measure, next breath before the downbeat. That yes, that one lung says to its twin. Adan, what, if anything, brings us together? Arbitrary borders, a belief in curses, folk saints who steal from the rich, aunts, sisters, and mothers who suffer too damn much. Whoa, a brass band is passing. I'm back on my grandfather's shoulders in New Bedford, Mass. It's festa do Espírito Santo, the Holy Spirit feast. And a tuba gives heartbeats to the Virgin Mary float, cymbals clashing. Whoa. Yes, Chalino met his badge flashing, sunglassed assassins outside Culiacan. Yes, your limo crashed in that same free and sovereign state, or so they say. And no, I can't match the pitch of 15,000 teenagers weeping in the streets of Los Angeles, or the mess that followed, riot gear and pellet guns, Ford truck flipped over in flames. But ridiculous luck, Adon is needed for one's own voice to adorn post-mortem a few romantic ballads in a locked room. Nadie es eterno, nobody's forever. Bésame, morenita, kiss me, my beautiful brown woman. Ridiculous look, Adon, let me say it again, is needed for one's own voice to adorn post-mortem a few romantic ballads in a locked room, where two and candlelight can create anything, even a little death, even a life. Thanks, y'all.